Airline staff dismisses a black pilot minutes later. She teaches them an unforgettable lesson. The morning air at O'Hare International Airport was thick with fog as Ava Mitchell strode through the terminal, her pilot's case rolling behind her, 4 gold stripes gleaming on each sleeve. Today wasn't just another day. It was her first as a senior captain for Meridian Airlines, one of the country's most prestigious yet notoriously exclusive carriers. She checked her watch. 5:17 a.m., 13 minutes until briefing. Enough time for a quick coffee to settle her nerves. She had spent years preparing for this moment, logging over 15,000 flight hours, serving as a military transport pilot, and flying commercial routes across 6 continents. Yet something about today felt off. As she stepped into the crew lounge, she immediately felt the shift in energy. Conversations paused, eyes flickered toward her, before quickly looking away. It wasn't new. In a profession where less than 1% of commercial pilots were black women, Ava had long since grown used to the stares. "You must be Captain Mitchell," a voice said from behind. She turned to see a man in his late 50s, salt and pepper hair neatly combed, his uniform crisp. The same 4 gold stripes marked his sleeves. "Captain Grant Reynolds," he introduced himself, extending a hand. "Welcome to Meridian." Ava shook his hand, firm but polite. "Thank you, sir. It's an honor to join the team." "Grant," he corrected, flashing a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I'll be your check captain for the next few weeks." She nodded. "I've already reviewed our flight path and weather briefings. Expecting light turbulence over the Rockies, but nothing unusual." Reynolds studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. "Good. The crew's in briefing room C. I'll meet you there in 5. As he walked away, Ava's gut twisted. She had spent her career learning to read people. In a cockpit, split-second decisions meant life or death, and knowing who you could trust mattered. Something about Reynolds felt off. Brushing aside the feeling, she grabbed her coffee and caught her reflection in the machine's metallic surface. Her father's words echoed in her mind. "You'll have to be twice as good to get half as far." She had lived by those words. Ava stepped into briefing room C, where 6 flight attendants and her co-pilot, Noah Park, were already seated. Noah, a young Asian-American pilot, stood when he saw her, flashing a genuine smile. "Captain Mitchell," he greeted. "Heard great things. Looking forward to flying with you." Before she could respond, the door swung open. Stephen Holloway, Meridian's Executive Operations Director, entered, followed by Reynolds. "There's been a change of plans," Holloway announced, deliberately avoiding Ava's gaze. "Captain Reynolds will be taking command of Flight 207 today." Ava stiffened. "Excuse me? Captain Mitchell, we need you to wait outside while we reassign you." Silence fell over the room. Ava felt all eyes on her, heat creeping up her neck. "May I ask why?" she said, keeping her voice steady. Holloway glanced at Reynolds. "San Francisco is a challenging approach, and given your unfamiliarity with our protocols." Ava cut him off. "I've flown into SFO 73 times over the past decade, including during severe weather conditions. My qualifications were thoroughly reviewed during hiring." Holloway's jaw tightened. "This isn't up for discussion. Please wait outside." Ava considered pushing back, but she knew this wasn't the hill to die on. Not yet. With dignity, she set down her flight documents, squared her shoulders, and walked out. The hallway felt colder than it had moments before. Outside, she leaned against the wall, her mind racing. This wasn't just about a flight reassignment. This was calculated, deliberate, and if they thought she was going to stay silent, they had underestimated the wrong woman. Ava Mitchell had faced discrimination before, but something about Meridian Airlines felt different. This wasn't just bias, it was a system built to keep people like her out. As she stood in the hallway, the sting of her reassignment still fresh, she reminded herself that she hadn't gotten this far by backing down. She wasn't just any pilot, she was one of the best. But at Meridian, that didn't seem to matter. The door to briefing room C swung open, and out stepped Noah Park, her assigned co-pilot. His expression was tense, conflicted. Captain Mitchell, I just wanted to say, I think this is nonsense. Ava crossed her arms. What exactly did they say after I left? Noah hesitated. They claimed it's standard for new captains to shadow flights before taking command, he said. Then, his voice dropped. But I've been here 3 years. I've never seen them pull this with anyone else. Ava exhaled slowly. She already knew it, but hearing it confirmed her worst suspicions. They want me to shadow someone? She asked, her voice laced with sarcasm. Noah nodded. Flight 422 to Seattle. Who's captaining? Noah's jaw tightened. Russell Gaines. Ava's stomach dropped. Captain Russell Gaines, the most senior pilot at Meridian Airlines, a man who, according to industry gossip, had been vocally against hiring female and minority captains. They want me to learn from him? Ava said, shaking her head. This isn't training, this is hazing. Noah sighed. Look, I don't know what their endgame is, but I do know this. Meridian isn't just an airline, it's an institution, and institutions don't change easily. Ava had already figured that out. The glances in the crew lounge, the way conversations died when she entered a room. Meridian was run by a tight-knit circle of men who had spent decades ensuring that their ranks remained untouched. The Old Boys Club. Their method was simple: make her uncomfortable, push her out. She had seen the same playbook before. She had served under commanders in the Air Force who doubted her until she outflew them. She had faced skeptical co-pilots who watched her every move until she proved them wrong. This time, she wasn't playing their game. Thanks for telling me, Noah, she said, straightening. But if they think they're going to break me, they're in for a surprise. Noah gave a small nod, admiration in his eyes. Good luck with Gaines, Captain. He's going to need it more than I do. From the moment Ava Mitchell stepped into the cockpit of Flight 422 to Seattle, she knew exactly what she was walking into. Captain Russell Gaines barely acknowledged her presence, offering only a curt nod before turning his attention back to the pre-flight checklist. Sit back and watch, Captain, he said, not bothering to look at her. You'll learn how things are really done at Meridian. Ava bit the inside of her cheek, forcing herself to stay composed. She wasn't a rookie, and she certainly didn't need a condescending lecture from a man who had probably been flying since before she was born. But this was part of their test to see if she would break, push back, or fail. As the pre-flight procedures began, Gaines spoke in a slow, deliberate tone, narrating every action like he was explaining basic aviation to a student pilot. I assume you're familiar with a Boeing 737, Captain Mitchell? He asked, flipping switches. Ava didn't take the bait. I flew C-17s in combat zones before transitioning to commercial aviation. I think I can handle a 737. Gaines grunted. Military pilots don't always transition well to civilian procedures, he muttered. We'll see if you can keep up. Ava simply nodded, refusing to engage further. She had dealt with men like him her entire career, the ones who mistook experience for entitlement, tradition for exclusion. The flight itself was uneventful until they reached final approach. That's when Gaines made a mistake. A small one, but one that mattered. He input the wrong frequency for approach control, something that could easily go unnoticed until Seattle ATC failed to respond. Ava caught it instantly. Captain, Seattle approach is 2835 today, not 124.75, she said evenly. The cockpit went silent. Gaines froze. His hand hovered over the radio before he double-checked the charts. She was right. He adjusted the frequency without a word, his jaw tightening. Ava could feel the tension radiating off of him, but she wasn't going to let it slide. Good thing we caught it, she added, keeping her tone neutral. Gaines exhaled sharply. You have a good eye. It was the closest thing to respect she had received from him all day. But then, as they taxied to the gate, he turned to face her for the first time. One good catch doesn't make you Meridian material, he said, voice low. This airline has standards, traditions, not everyone fits. Ava's stomach twisted, but she didn't let it show. With calm, unwavering confidence, she met his gaze. With all due respect, Captain, traditions evolve. They have to. Gaines stared at her for a long moment, then simply turned away, saying nothing. Ava knew she had passed their first test. But she also knew they weren't done trying to push her out. And if they thought she was going to break, they had another thing coming. The hazing at Meridian Airlines wasn't just about Ava Mitchell's race or gender. It was about power. The company's leadership men, like Captain Russell Gaines and Executive Director Stephen Holloway, wanted to make it crystal clear that Ava was not welcome. But what they hadn't anticipated was that Ava wasn't just here to fly, she was here to see. After weeks of being shuffled from flight to flight, forced to shadow captains instead of commanding her own, Ava had started noticing patterns. Some were subtle, like how certain aircraft were always rushed through inspections. Others were impossible to ignore, like the whispers among the maintenance crew about corporate pressure to overlook safety concerns. She decided to dig deeper. During a layover in Denver, she struck up a conversation with Darius Coleman, a seasoned maintenance technician who had been with Meridian for over 20 years. He was cautious at first, hesitant to say anything that could cost him his job. But as soon as he realized that Ava wasn't just another company lackey, he let his guard down. "You ever wonder why some planes are cleared for flight in half the time they should be?" he asked, voice low. Ava's stomach tightened. "You're saying maintenance is being rushed?" Darius nodded grimly. "More than rushed? Some of these birds? They should be grounded for serious repairs. But management keeps pushing us to sign off and handle it later. They don't want delays. They don't want cancellations. And they sure as hell don't want the FAA asking questions." Ava inhaled sharply, her mind racing. In the military, she had been taught that aircraft maintenance was life or death. There was no room for shortcuts. But at Meridian, it seemed like shortcuts were standard practice. She needed proof. Over the next week, she befriended more mechanics, asking careful questions, watching their reactions. The stories piled up. Leaking hydraulic systems patched instead of replaced. Engine components wearing out prematurely, but marked as low risk. Flight logs manipulated to avoid mandatory downtime. The more she uncovered, the more furious she became. Then came the breaking point. Ava was scheduled to shadow yet another flight, this time to Toronto. As she waited near the aircraft, she spotted Lauren Kim, a flight attendant she had gotten to know. Izzy approached her, glancing over her shoulder before speaking. "Captain Mitchell, I have to show you something." Ava followed her to the galley, where Izzy pulled out her phone and opened a photo gallery. The images made Ava's blood run cold. A cracked cabin pressure valve on Flight 336. A wing panel with visible corrosion, ignored during inspection. A report showing a fuel pump issue that had mysteriously disappeared from maintenance logs. Izzy swallowed hard. "I've been documenting this for months. If I say anything, I'm out of a job, but if I don't, someone could die." Ava exhaled slowly. This was bigger than discrimination. This was criminal negligence. And if Meridian Airlines thought she was going to sit back and stay silent, they were dead wrong. Ava Mitchell had spent her career trusting in the system. The idea that safety came first, that rules were followed, and that everyone in aviation played by the same standards. But after what she had seen at Meridian Airlines, she realized that the system wasn't just broken. It was being deliberately corrupted. And those who tried to fix it, they were silenced. The stories started adding up. Mechanics like Darius Coleman had warned her about rushed inspections and forged maintenance reports. But what really shook Ava was what happened to those who refused to play along. "We used to have a guy named Ethan Vance," Darius told her in a hushed voice during a break in the maintenance hangar. "Damn good mechanic. Honest, sharp, one of the best." Ava could hear the hesitation in his voice. "So what happened?" Darius sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Last year, he reported an issue with an engine mount on a 787. Said it wasn't flight ready. Management disagreed. Next thing you know, he's reassigned to some back-office paperwork job. 3 weeks later, he accidentally falls from a maintenance platform. Broke his back. Career over. Ava felt a chill run down her spine. You think it wasn't an accident? Darius met her eyes, his expression grim. I think nothing at Meridian happens by accident. It wasn't just mechanics. A former flight attendant, Lauren Kim, had reported several near-miss incidents where safety violations were covered up. The result? She was fired for unprofessional conduct just days later. A co-pilot, Peter Lawson, had raised concerns about weight distribution errors in cargo flights. His response? Reassigned to desk duty indefinitely. This wasn't incompetence. This was a culture of retaliation. And the longer Ava stayed at Meridian, the more she realized that she was next. It started subtly. Her schedule was changed without warning, forcing her onto red-eye flights and layovers that gave her minimum rest time. Her performance reviews were suddenly questioned, despite her perfect record. Supervisors like Stephen Holloway made offhand comments in meetings, things like, "Some pilots just don't fit in here," or, "You sure you can handle Meridian's expectations?" And then one morning, her badge access was revoked. She arrived for a flight only to find out she had been removed from the schedule. HR called her in that afternoon. "We're placing you on administrative review, Captain Mitchell," a young HR rep told her, avoiding eye contact, "pending an evaluation of your compatibility with Meridian's culture." Ava leaned forward, keeping her voice calm but firm. "And what exactly does that mean?" The HR rep swallowed nervously. "It means you're not allowed to fly until further notice." Ava knew exactly what this was. It wasn't a review. It was a warning. They wanted her to walk away quietly. But that wasn't going to happen. Because Ava wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for every employee who had been silenced before her. And she was about to make sure that Meridian Airlines paid the price. Ava Mitchell had always known that fighting against systemic corruption wasn't easy. But now, her career, her reputation, and the safety of thousands of passengers depended on what she did next. Meridian Airlines had shown its hand. They wanted her gone. They had put her on administrative review, hoping she would quit under pressure. But instead of backing down, Ava dug in. She spent the next several nights in her apartment, sifting through everything she had collected. The maintenance violations, the altered flight logs, the first-hand testimonies from Darius Coleman, Lauren Kim, and others who had seen the cover-ups in action. She organized them into folders, cross-referenced dates, and identified patterns. The deeper she went, the clearer the picture became. Planes that should have been grounded for repairs were cleared to fly. FAA regulations were ignored or reinterpreted to keep flights on schedule. Employees who spoke up were either reassigned, fired, or mysteriously injured on the job. Ava knew that one wrong move could cost her everything. The airline had billions of dollars at stake, and the executives running it had spent their careers burying scandals. If she was going to take them down, she needed to be smart. Ava started reaching out quietly, carefully. She called Elena Mitchell, her younger sister, who just happened to be a corporate attorney, with a specialty in whistleblower cases. "Elena, I need your help." Elena sighed through the phone. "I was wondering when you'd finally say that. Tell me everything." For the next 2 hours, Ava laid it all out, the cover-ups, the falsified maintenance reports, the retaliation. By the time she finished, Elena wasn't just listening, she was furious. "Ava, this isn't just workplace discrimination. This is a criminal conspiracy." Ava already knew that. "What do I do?" she asked. Elena exhaled. "You need to do 2 things. First, get this information to someone with real power. Second, make sure you have an insurance policy." "Insurance? You don't think these people will just let you take them down, do you? You need to make sure that if anything happens to you, everything you've found still comes to light." Ava followed her sister's advice. First, she secured her evidence. She uploaded copies of every document, photo, and report to an encrypted drive, then shared the access codes with Elena and a trusted journalist at the Chicago Tribune. Then she made her move. She scheduled a secret meeting with the FAA, using an anonymous email to request a sit-down with their aviation safety oversight team. If the federal regulators knew what was happening, Meridian Airlines wouldn't just be facing bad press. They'd be facing criminal charges. Finally, she called Darius Coleman. "Darius, I know this is dangerous, but if you're willing to testify, we can expose all of it." There was a long pause. Then Darius sighed. "I've spent too many years watching good people lose their jobs because of these crooks. If you're going to take them down, Captain, I'm in." Ava gripped her phone tighter. "Good, because we're running out of time." Ava knew the moment she went public, Meridian Airlines would strike back. But this time, she was ready. They had pushed her out of the cockpit. Now, she was about to crash their entire empire. Ava Mitchell had spent weeks gathering evidence, securing witnesses, and preparing for battle. Now, it was time to pull the trigger. She knew that Meridian Airlines was watching her closely. Ever since they had placed her on administrative review, security guards had started subtly monitoring her movements. Her emails were flagged, and she was denied access to key areas of the company's headquarters. They were waiting for her to make a mistake. But what they didn't know was that she wasn't making mistakes. She was making moves. The morning of the FAA meeting, Ava walked into Meridian's main offices with the confidence of a woman who already knew she had won. She wasn't alone. Darius Coleman had agreed to testify about the airline's safety violations, and Lauren Kim had provided damning documentation on falsified inspections. Ava stood before a panel of FAA officials, spreading out files, reports, and first-hand accounts. "This isn't just negligence," she stated firmly. "This is willful deception. They're cutting corners, putting passengers at risk, and silencing anyone who tries to speak out." The FAA officials exchanged glances, flipping through the pages of irrefutable proof. One of them, a senior investigator, looked up. "Captain Mitchell, are you aware of the consequences of making these accusations?" Ava met his gaze without hesitation. "Are you aware of the consequences if you don't act?" So, then the lead investigator set his pen down. "We'll be launching a formal inquiry into Meridian Airlines immediately." Within 24 hours, the FAA had sent a formal notice to Meridian Airlines. The investigation was no longer just an internal complaint. It was federal oversight. Word spread like wildfire. Employees whispered in break rooms. Flight crews exchanged knowing looks. Executives? They were in full-blown panic mode. That afternoon, Ava was called into a high-level meeting with the company's leadership. Stephen Holloway, Russell Gaines, and a team of corporate lawyers sat across from her. Their faces were tight, their voices controlled. "Captain Mitchell, we need to discuss your future at Meridian." Ava leaned back in her chair, arms crossed. "You mean the future of this airline?" They knew. They knew that their cover-up was unraveling. They thought they could contain the damage. What they didn't know was that Ava had one last move to play. Because while they were scrambling to protect their reputations, the Chicago Tribune was already preparing to run the story. Ava Mitchell had planned every move carefully, but once the Chicago Tribune broke the story, there was no turning back. The front-page headline read, "Exclusive, whistleblower pilot exposes major safety violations at Meridian Airlines." Within hours, the story went viral. Major news networks picked it up. Aviation watchdog groups demanded answers. And most importantly, passengers, the people who had trusted Meridian Airlines with their lives, were outraged. Inside the company's headquarters, chaos erupted. Calls poured in from furious investors. The board of directors scheduled an emergency meeting. Executives scrambled to issue statements denying wrongdoing, but the damage was already done. By midday, the FAA publicly confirmed its investigation. Regulators weren't just looking at paperwork now, they were grounding flights, pulling records, and interviewing employees. And in the middle of it all, Ava watched as the airline that had tried to silence her was now begging to be heard. Meridian didn't go down without a fight. Within 24 hours, their PR team issued a statement calling Ava's allegations exaggerated and misrepresented. They claimed Meridian had a spotless safety record, and any maintenance concerns were routine issues, not safety threats. But Ava had anticipated this. She had prepared files, emails, and testimonies from employees like Darius Coleman and Lauren Kim. When reporters reached out to her, she didn't just give quotes. She gave evidence. The public wasn't stupid. Within 2 days, Meridian stock plummeted by 18%. Social media exploded with passengers canceling flights and demanding refunds. Former employees, mechanics, flight attendants, pilots started coming forward. Some were anonymous. Others, like Peter Lawson, the co-pilot who had seen firsthand how Ava was treated, went on the record. The dominoes had started falling. Ava expected retaliation, and she was right. On day 3 of the scandal, she received an email from Meridian's HR department. "Captain Mitchell, you are hereby placed on indefinite suspension pending further review." She almost laughed. They still thought they could silence her. They still thought she needed their permission to win. But what they didn't realize was that the battle was already over. Because the FAA had just announced an expanded investigation into the airline's leadership. And Meridian Airlines was already circling the drain. By the time Meridian Airlines suspended Ava Mitchell, it was too late. They had spent decades covering up safety violations, retaliating against employees, and manipulating records to keep flights running. But now, under the weight of federal scrutiny, public outrage, and an internal collapse, the airline was beginning to crumble. Within a week of the FAA's official inquiry, Meridian was forced to ground nearly 40% of its fleet due to pending maintenance evaluations. Airlines don't make money when planes aren't flying, and Meridian was losing millions by the day. Investors panicked. With the company's stock value plummeting, shareholders demanded answers. Calls for leadership resignations grew louder, and soon, Meridian CEO Stephen Holloway resigned effective immediately. But Ava wasn't celebrating yet. She knew that a corporation like Meridian wouldn't go down without a fight. They were still pushing back, still trying to discredit her. "This is just a smear campaign by a disgruntled employee," Captain Russell Gaines sneered in an interview on a cable news network. But the public wasn't buying it. Days later, the Chicago Tribune published leaked internal emails showing that executives had deliberately ignored FAA warnings about safety violations. The message was clear. This wasn't a smear campaign. It was the truth. As more employees came forward, as more flights were canceled, and as more reporters dug deeper, the board of directors made one last desperate move. They reached out to Ava. "Captain Mitchell, we'd like to discuss a resolution," the email read. Ava smirked at the thinly veiled plea. They weren't offering a resolution. They were begging for a way out. But Ava wasn't here to negotiate. She was here to finish what she started. Ava Mitchell sat in her apartment, reading the email from Meridian's board of directors. They wanted a discussion, but she knew exactly what that meant. They weren't looking for accountability. They were looking for damage control. She forwarded the email to her sister, Elena Mitchell, who had been guiding her legal strategy from the start. Minutes later, Elena called. "They want you to settle, Ava." Ava expected this. The airline was bleeding money and their executives were under investigation. They thought offering her a settlement, likely a hefty sum in exchange for her silence, would end the nightmare for them. But Ava hadn't come this far just to take a check and walk away. "We don't negotiate with criminals," she replied coolly. Elena laughed. "That's what I thought you'd say." Instead of responding to Meridian, Ava gave the email to the press. The next morning, headlines exploded. Meridian Airlines tries to silence whistleblower as FAA investigation expands. The public was furious. The airline had been caught covering up safety violations, and now they were trying to buy their way out. The backlash was immediate. Passengers canceled flights, major investors pulled out, lawsuits started piling up. And then came the final blow. The FAA suspended Meridian's operating license, citing gross negligence and ongoing safety concerns. For the first time in 55 years, Meridian Airlines had no planes in the sky. The company had tried to clip Ava's wings. Instead, she had brought them crashing down. When the FAA officially suspended Meridian Airlines' operating license, it sent shockwaves through the industry. A major airline grounded indefinitely. Travelers were left stranded at airports. Investors were in a frenzy, and employees who had spent years protecting the company's lies were now scrambling to save themselves. News outlets flooded the airwaves with stories about the toxic culture at Meridian, from discriminatory hiring practices to falsified maintenance reports that put thousands of lives at risk. And at the center of it all, Ava Mitchell. The airline that once tried to erase her was now defined by her fight for the truth. Inside Meridian's headquarters, the board of directors convened in a last-ditch effort to salvage what was left. But it was too late. The company's stock had plummeted to an all-time low, and with the FAA refusing to reinstate their operating certificate, they had no way forward. By the end of the week, Meridian Airlines filed for bankruptcy. Ava watched the press conference from her apartment, a quiet sense of finality settling over her. She had spent months fighting a system designed to silence her, and now that system was gone. But she wasn't done yet. The aviation industry had just witnessed what happened when whistleblowers were willing to stand their ground, and Ava was about to make sure no one forgot it. With Meridian Airlines officially bankrupt, the industry was forced to reckon with its failures. The airline's collapse wasn't just about one company, it was about a system that had ignored safety for profit. Now, regulators, investors, and the public demanded change. Ava Mitchell had done more than expose a corrupt airline. She had forced an industry-wide shift. Days after Meridian's shutdown, she received a call from an FAA official. "Captain Mitchell," the voice on the other end said, "we need people like you on the new Aviation Safety Oversight Committee." The FAA was implementing sweeping reforms, and they wanted Ava at the forefront. She hesitated for only a moment. She had spent her life fighting for a seat at the table. Now she was being offered a position where she could change the rules entirely. "I'll do it," she said. But she wasn't stopping there. Ava also began working with other airlines, ensuring that whistleblower protections were put in place and that safety concerns could never be ignored again. The industry had learned a lesson, and it came from the black female pilot they once tried to shut out. Now, she was leading the future of aviation.